Welcome to St. John Regional Area's presentation on Anderson PowerPole connectors. We'll look at PowerPole connectors and the power distribution systems you can either buy or build, ways of using these connectors, and projects that make use of the connectors. This presentation should run for about 30 minutes. PowerPole connectors let you create 12-volt connections between power supplies and 12-volt equipment. They assemble like building blocks, allowing a variety of configurations. They've been adopted as a standard power connector for areas throughout North America. They've also become popular outside of areas because of their simplicity and flexibility. They're cheap, reliable, and easy to use either in the shack or in the field. If you're using another connector system now, you may be wondering why you should bother with PowerPole. The primary advantage is compatibility with other operators and with equipment that you may be loaned during area's operations. However, there's other reasons beyond areas for using these connectors. First and foremost, they're very easy to assemble and use. They make switching and moving equipment around much easier since all your 12-volt interconnects will be compatible with each other. If you assemble them properly, they provide good polarity protection, meaning that you can't accidentally cross positive and negative terminals. If you're using another connector system, for instance a trailer connector system, this can happen, particularly if you accidentally connect two power supplies. PowerPole connectors also provide exceptionally low contact resistance, which means less voltage drop and better equipment performance. They're very resistant to overheating, melting, and fire. And at about $1 for an assembled connector, they're very cheap when compared to other types of connectors. Connector blocks and commercial power panels are available to give your shack a clean look, and these also give you the equivalent of a 120-volt power bar, but for your 12-volt accessories. When it comes down to it, though, the key reason for using PowerPoles is to standardize with other amateurs and ensure intercompatibility. Standardization provides huge benefits during disaster operations. It allows operators and their equipment to be integrated together at emergency operations centers, in mobiles, and in the field. It means you'll be able to power and charge your equipment when you arrive at an EOC, when you're operating in someone else's vehicle, or when you're borrowing a portable power source. With a PowerPole system in your car, you'll be able to operate equipment loaned to you by an EOC or another operator. PowerPole connectors are being set up in the Point La Pro EOC and at the KV EMO EOC to allow equipment swap-outs and the charging of operator equipment. The expectation is that all areas operators will be compatible with this power system. Let's talk for a minute about what a PowerPole connector actually looks like. Basically, there are two modular plastic blocks, one red and one black, that snap together side by side to make up a connector. Aries has a standardized way of putting the red and black connector together, but we'll talk about that later. When you're connecting gear to a power supply, both of the connections, the power side and the radio side, actually look exactly the same, unlike a Molex or other specialized connector. This type of connector is called genderless. There isn't a male or a female PowerPole connector. Instead, you flip one of the connectors upside down to allow it to mate with the other connector. By flipping the connector over, you're lining up the red contact on one with the red contact on the other. This lack of gender might seem a bit odd, since it allows you to connect two pieces of gear together by accident, or even two power supplies, but the flexibility is actually an advantage. For one thing, it guarantees polarity protection. In the field, you may decide to connect two battery supplies in parallel, or you may wish to charge a battery with a power supply. This system allows you to do that very easily and safely. Looking more closely at the plastic shells, you'll see a tongue and groove fitting on the sides of each shell. This allows you to lock the shells together. When you buy the connectors, they come as a collection of empty shells and matching contact tabs. When you assemble the connectors yourself, you first start by connecting the contacts to wires, then by inserting the contacts into the shells, and then by locking the shells together to complete the connector. The contact sits locked in place inside its shell. When the connector is mated, the two contacts are spring-loaded to provide a good surface area for the current. These pictures show cutaway images, obviously. In real life, the contacts are hidden from view and protected inside their shells. The contacts are available in a range of sizes with different current ratings. The standard is a 15 or 30 amp contact. Regardless of the size of the contact, though, the size of the shell stays the same. How you use PowerPole depends on your station. If you have a home station, you probably want to use PowerPoles for connecting portable equipment like handhelds to your station power, or for connecting equipment that you may want to move during an emergency. If you expect to have other guest operators at your station, you should consider providing spare PowerPole connectors to your power supply so their equipment can be jacked into the station power. If you have a mobile station, you'll probably want to use PowerPoles on any equipment that you might remove from the vehicle occasionally. You'll also want to provide spare connections to power equipment that you may borrow during an emergency, or equipment that you own but don't normally have in the car. Power poles are compact, so you'll be able to provide a number of extra power connectors without creating a mess or taking up space. You can even use power poles in man-portable packs. By running wire and power poles through a backpack that you're planning on using for deployments, you'll be able to quickly and easily assemble a portable station when the time comes. You'll find a use for power poles anytime you need to distribute 12-volt power. From an area's point of view, power poles are especially useful because they make it easy to assemble safe, neat, and compatible power distribution systems in the field. When you want to start using power poles, it's a good idea to sit down with a piece of paper and plan out how you're going to distribute power and interconnect your equipment. You need to figure out how many connectors you need and whether you want any other power pole components such as distribution panels. Once you've mapped out your plan and you know how many connectors you'll need, it's time to find a vendor. You can buy power pole supplies from a radio dealer, like Radio World or Durham Radio, or from an electronic parts distributor. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation. We'll also talk about how to build the connectors once you've bought the parts. When you map out your station power, consider the different 12-volt power supplies you have and the various 12-volt devices you're going to use. Don't just focus on your radios. Think about other 12-volt devices you may also want to support, such as portable lights or computers. Think about where these supplies and devices are going to be used. The point is to figure out where you need to distribute power and where you need to connect and disconnect devices. Once you have a rough map, start identifying changes in configuration. For example, times when you're going to move a radio between your shack and your car. These changes will require some type of connector to facilitate the insertion and removal of equipment, both in the car and in the home station. Think about equipment that you might want to move in the case of an emergency, like a portable HF radio. Also think about supporting other operators aboard equipment. Think about where you're going to place connectors for power distribution. In your car, you might decide to put the power connections underneath the passenger seat, or you might mount a power distribution block under the dash where it's more accessible. On your map, figure out where you need to provide fusing. If you have a connector that might serve a handheld or a small HF rig, fusing isn't a simple issue. Do you fuse it for 5 amps or for 35 amps? Make sure that fuses will be easy to access in case they get blown out, and also remember to label them so you can keep track of what's connected to what. If you already have a connector system, for example a set of cigarette lighter plugs, trailer connectors, Molex, or other connectors, you may want to decide whether you're going to keep those connectors and use them in addition to your power poles, or simply replace them with the power poles. If you want to keep your current system, you can use the power pole connectors in parallel or in series to allow the use of both systems. This means you don't have to change what you're doing now, but you'd also be compatible with other power pole operators and equipment. A simple rule of thumb is to buy 2 connector contacts and shells for each power supply, that makes 1 connector, and 4 for each radio or 12-volt device, making 1 connector for the radio and 1 for its power supply. An even simpler thing to do is simply buy a bag of connectors. Buy a lot, since they're fairly cheap, and when you run out, buy more. Connectors are available in bags of 10 or 20, and it's easier to have a bag or 2 in your shack or ready kit and build the connectors where and when they're needed, rather than trying to accommodate every contingency ahead of time. More complicated power plans may involve power distribution panels or blocks. These are the power pole equivalent of a 120-volt power bar. You can build these yourself very quickly by simply sliding connectors together using their tongue and groove shells, or you can buy more professional-looking ones from manufacturers like Saratoga and MFJ. And again, in Canada, you can buy these through Radio World or through Durham Radio. When you order power pole components, the simplest thing to do is to order a bag of connector parts from a vendor like Durham or Radio World. When you order them this way, you get an equal number of black and red shells and a matching number of contacts, typically half for 15 amp and half for 30 amp. That way you know you've got a matching number of components, and it's a very easy package to work with. However, if you're ordering a lot of connectors in bulk and you want to save some money on that, or if you're ordering specialized connectors, for instance different colors of connector, you can buy them from an electronics distributor like Rosspower. They can be found on the web at www.connectors.ca. You can also reach them toll-free, and the number will be provided at the end of the presentation. If you do order from a distributor, you'll need to specify exactly how many shells of each color and how many contacts of each rating you'll want. If you want to avoid the homebrew look and buy pre-manufactured power panels, again, Radio World and Durham sell a number of different models from different manufacturers. However, these can be expensive, running anywhere from $70 to $200 or $300 for various sizes and features of panel. If you're in the market and don't want to spend that much money, you can also keep an eye out on eBay. PowerPole components often come up periodically on eBay, although you're often buying them from the States. Some PowerPole users swear by the Anderson crimping tool, which is specifically designed for marrying PowerPole contact tabs to wires. However, other users make do with ordinary crimping tools without problems. You can also use a solder gun or torch to make these connections, so think twice before spending any money on specialized tools. The best thing to do is to try using the tools you have in hand and develop your own methods for making the connections. Some people prefer soldering, other people prefer crimping the connections. It's better to find out if what you have works before you spend extra money on an expensive tool just for PowerPole. Actually, assembling the PowerPole connectors is very simple. First, you choose an appropriate size for the tab. You solder or crimp the contact tab onto your wire, then you insert the tab into the shell. Slide the two shells together and you're done. If you're considering soldering rather than crimping connectors, there's several things about the PowerPole that make it very convenient. For one thing, you actually attach the wire to the connector tab before you put the tab into the plastic shell. This means you don't have to worry about melting the shell or working in a very tight space within the shell. The first thing you do is attach the wire to the tab. In some cases you may want to crimp it before soldering. Then you can use either a traditional solder gun or a butane torch to simply heat the tab and solder the connection. Once it's cooled down, you can then insert it easily into the housing with the wire in place. When it's time to actually put the connector and the wire into the housing, be sure to align it so that it's flat when compared to the existing metal at the bottom of the connector. It has to slide in through a narrow groove. If you get this wrong and you force it, you'll bend the tabs. If you get it right, you'll notice right away that there's a very smooth action and a click once it fits into place. Once it's in and pushed forward, it will actually lock and the connector won't be free to come out again. You do need to be careful to ensure that two shells are oriented properly. Looking into the connector from the front, with the metal contact tabs at the bottom, the red shell must be on the left. This is very important. If you get this wrong, you're going to blow something up. This is what protects you from polarity errors. How you lock the two shells together is a matter of personal preference and the application that you're addressing. In most cases, simply using the tongue and groove fittings in each shell provides a good lock, and it is unlikely that two shells will accidentally separate. However, some people prefer to make the joint permanent. There are several ways to do this. The simplest is simply to apply some crazy glue after joining the two shells. You can also join multiple connections together to make a block that allows you to power more than one device. You can daisy chain the wire from one contact to the next and use the tongue and groove fittings provided on the top and bottom of the shells to stack them. This provides a very compact, very simple distribution block for power. When you assemble connectors, you can use them at the end of equipment power cables or power supply feeds, or use them in combination with other connectors such as cigarette lighter plugs to make PowerPole adapters. Although PowerPoles are fairly reliable and don't tend to separate on their own, there may be times where you want to take extra steps to ensure that your connection stays intact. For instance, if you're in a situation where there's a lot of vibration or movement, or where you cannot afford to have a loss of power, you may want to take steps to lock the connections. Anderson sells a plastic fitting called a block lock. It's expensive, but it is very effective at maintaining the connection regardless of movement or vibration. A simpler way of doing it is to wrap some electrical tape around the connection to dampen vibration. You can also use a Velcro wire harness to hold the two sides of the connection together. You can use a wire tie to provide a more permanent solution. Finally, and I don't recommend this because it defeats the whole point of having a portable, removable connection, you can apply glue to the fitting, which will definitely prevent it from ever separating. There may be times where you want to actually take your Anderson PowerPole connector apart again. For instance, you might want to clean or replace a contact that's been burnt or dirtied. You may want to increase the gauge of a contact tab or wire, or you may want to fix a bad joint or a loose crimp. Taking a connector apart is actually fairly straightforward. You need to find a small flathead screwdriver or a penknife and use the tip of the penknife or the flathead screwdriver to lift up the contact tab at the very end of the connector on the other side from the wire. What holds the contact tab in place is a small metal lip inside the shell. If you can lift the connector tab up above that and push back, it will slide right out of the housing. PowerPole connectors are very project friendly. You can do a lot of things with them around the shack or in your mobile or even in other non-aries or non-amateur applications. The types of projects that are easy to do in a matter of an hour or an afternoon include adapter cords, homebrew power distribution blocks, putting a PowerPole connectors into your car or your shack, and even building PowerPole connectors into your equipment. The PowerPole system is fairly straightforward and foolproof, but there are some cautions to keep in mind. First of all, if you see PowerPole connectors or equipment that have a color scheme other than red and black, it would be a good idea not to use it until you've confirmed the voltage that's being used. Some people are using colors other than red and black to indicate different voltages or to indicate that AC is being used. Always check the polarity when you go to a new site or start using a new PowerPole system, just in case the person who implemented that system got it wrong. You want to make sure that the voltage is correct before you connect your equipment for the first time. Also, think about the fusing that's behind those PowerPole connections. When you first look at a PowerPole connector, you don't necessarily know what current it's designed to carry. The fuse upstream may be a 5 amp or 35 amp fuse, so it's a good idea to check first before you attach your HF rig to something that was meant to support only a handheld. Also, if you're implementing a PowerPole system yourself, it's a good idea to put labels on the wiring to indicate what the wiring has been fused for. Another thing to watch out for is connector integrity. If you don't put the contact tabs completely into the shells, it's possible for them to come out during use. If they slide out, there may be a short. When you're putting the tabs into the shells, be sure you feel that détente, that click that indicates that the tab is completely locked into place. Also, be sure you don't connect two power supplies unless you know they can be safely used together. There may be times where you do want to connect a power supply to a battery or to connect two batteries for load sharing, but you want to make sure ahead of time that there won't be a dangerous condition caused by voltage differentials or loads. The PowerPole system is very flexible and allows you to play around with it a bit. You can come up with your own ideas about how you want to use it. Now, while it's a good idea to respect certain standards, for instance red and black meaning DC 12 volts, you can use the Anderson system to make your life much more convenient, not only for your amateur gear but also for any other equipment that you're interconnecting. For instance, if you have devices that use different voltages, for example a 5 volt mobile phone or a 9 volt portable TV, you might want to use color-coded Anderson connectors to distribute power to those devices. This can have advantages if you use a variable voltage power supply when you're traveling, or if you want to use one power supply with a number of different devices that require different adapters. It can also be useful for radios such as modern handhelds that allow you to use a range of input voltages. The key is to pick colors that mean something to you so you won't accidentally apply the wrong voltage to a device. For example, higher voltages could use brighter colors such as yellow, and lower voltages could be using darker colors such as blue or green. Another idea some amateurs have tried is using these connectors for rudimentary antenna connections while they're in the field. These connectors are not designed for RF, but some operators have had success with them when using man-portable or emergency antenna systems. Well, that's it for our presentation this evening. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm sorry I wasn't able to attend personally, but I'm very happy that the club is taking an interest in areas and in implementing the PowerPole system. Sorry for the bad voiceover. The person who was supposed to do it for us was unfortunately unavailable. If you'd like more information on this subject, please feel free to browse the Aries website at www.emergencyplanning.ca. Just click on the St. John Aries tab. You can also find more about the PowerPole connection system at the Anderson website, www.andersonpower.com. You can also get some additional information about available products at the Durham Radio website and at the Radio World website. If you have any follow-up questions, comments, anything else, please feel free to give me a call or email me at ve9foxtrotkilo@rac.ca. Thanks very much. Have a good night.